what architecture makes it different, which part of the city do they live in, what furniture are they interested in, and then making sure that everybody had a distinct feel and something that said, like, this is my space and this is how I spent my money. And I think that was the hardest part, was making them feel different.
I am super excited to talk about Fall of the House of Usher. In case my Midnight Club vinyl doesn't already prove back there, I'm a big Mike Flanagan fan, so this has been on my radar since it was launched. And of course, you worked with him on that show. What was it like when he first approached you to reunite with him for this show?
Well, it was a very, very quick reuniting, because we literally finished Midnight Club on Friday and then Monday morning started Usher. So literally just a weekend. No, I was really honored and I feel very privileged to have been invited back to work with Mike so many times. He's very talented, very detailed, and I love his writing. So having something to sink my teeth into like Usher, which has a lot of meat to it, was really, really exciting.
Now, how immersed were you in Poe's works prior to him approaching you to come back for this show?
I studied art history and theater production design in university. So I had a lot of exposure to literature at the time, but I hadn't revisited Poe since then. So it's been a good 20 years. And it was really exciting, as it always is with Mike, when you get a new show and a new script and you go back to the original content to see his inspiration and where he started. Because as I'm sure you're very well aware, every story that he starts with, the origins, they're actually very small. Like, they're very short. Fall of the House of Usher is a very small, short story by Edgar Allan Poe, and Midnight Club is a very short book as well. And you go back and to see kind of how he takes it and layers it with other stories and grows it into this very intricate, very layered storyline is always just mind-blowing to me. And I always think I'm going to go back to the origin story and find out all of these amazing clues and all of these things. And I always get back to it and realize, like, it's actually, there's not a lot of hints there for me to work from, because Mike really does build things out a lot, which is so cool.
It is pretty impressive how much he can both honor source material while still creating something truly original. Especially the show, I think, is proof of that, in how he takes very basic concepts from Poe and just runs with them. Now, with that said, with bringing Poe's works to life, obviously they were very 1800s Gothic horror style. Did you find that challenging or easy to sort of translate those aesthetics into your production design for the modern day?
I think it was actually really interesting and an interesting challenge, because all the period works in the show, like the older time periods that we visited, those were a lot easier to incorporate in. But as you alluded to, taking a modern, big glass high-rise apartment and finding a way to instill the value of sort of the Poe of it all is very challenging. I think I let the script and the writing do a lot of the heavy lifting for a lot of the references. And more, I tried to create an overarching world that felt Gothic and creepy, and it could have the dark side, like Poe's work and like that time period, rather than specific elements in the sets that could speak to that, especially in the modern.
Which set did you find easy enough, or I don't want to say easy enough, which set did you find the most exciting to really find that balance?
In the more modern worlds, I really liked Tamerlane's apartment, even though it's one of the lighter, brighter spaces. Ultimately, it was one of the ones that had a little bit more architecture, because as modern as our time period was, for her, I gave her a little bit more of a classical feel, and having big archways and more detailed and ornate moldings was kind of a little place where I could insert that. And also with color, being able to desaturate so that when we did go to the dark places, you could give more shadows and more creep and more, atmosphere that felt more Gothic. I think hers was one of the ones that could be executed a little bit. It came across a little bit stronger. And then in the more period sets, my favorite one to instill some of the Poe in was Roderick's childhood home, which was a really interesting set, like probably my favorite, because the set itself was written as a 1950s suburban home, but obviously his mom is not from financial means, so it couldn't be anything extravagant, but also it needed to be the original house from the fall of the House of Usher, being like a Gothic Victorian. So, Gothic Victorian and 1950s suburbia don't really generally coexist. And so it was really a fun challenge to sort of say, okay, I'm going to say that in 1950s suburbia, they're so, a little bit more down on their luck. And therefore their house is actually another 60 or 70 years old. And it's just been updated. So they've got a 50s spin on an 1890s Victorian home. And that the other houses on the street are kind of a hodgepodge of character homes from the similar time period. And that's what makes up their suburbia. And that meant I could do a detailed fireplace, and I could do like heavy wood details, and I could do cool wallpapers and bring sort of a little bit more Poe into that space.
I love that thought process, because I did very much see sort of the parallels, especially as we cut back and forth between its current iteration and its past. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that I especially love too, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, was the way that colors play into every set, and very specifically towards each character and each story. Did that come from your interpretation of Mike's work? Did that come from Mike's work itself? How did that come about?
Actually, it was really interesting. So Mike came up with the colors, and in one of the very, very early meetings, he said, I've given every usher a color, and I don't know yet how we're going to incorporate the colors or where or when, but I want to see a color story, and here are their specific colors. And I think for me, who doesn't love color? But I love to help create a cohesiveness, especially when you have multiple time periods, multiple like levels of wealth, and you're in sort of so many worlds. One of my kind of strategies for making it feel really cohesive is to limit my palette, and try to build a very specific world of color and not step outside that. And that would be what can connect, a 1970s bar to a 2023 glass steel apartment. So I definitely, when he said everybody had a color, I thought, oh no, there goes my cohesive color plan. But I think it was a really cool challenge, because once he set those out, I sat down with Michael Flanigan, who is the co-director and the director of photography, who's like an amazingly talented guy. And we spent many hours talking about where the color was and how we could make the colors make sense, because he was of the same mind that it would be really easy to kind of get cluttered feeling visually if we didn't control that aspect of the world. So we decided, I pitched to Michael to do sort of a jewel tone palette, in that we would just tweak everything a little bit more period. So the red becomes more scarlet and the blue becomes more sapphire, and we're going more emerald with our greens. And then from there, we delved in further and said, okay, in terms of the sets, we're going to mute the colors so that we can then saturate with light or bring a pop of color with a costume or hair or whatever it happens to be, rather than oversaturate the color on our end in production design and then have nowhere to go with the other departments. And I think that was sort of the key for us to unlocking how to incorporate the colors, because I think it's a really cool idea and I love how it works, especially with lighting. Michael did a great job.
That was actually going to be my next question, was the lighting itself. Yeah. Because when everybody starts to experience what they experience, of course, I don't want to give anything away just yet, but when they experience what they experience, yeah. I did love, kind of like you were talking about, the saturation of light that comes in. How much of that was involved from you versus Michael or Mike?
I think Michael really was the driving force in the lighting. I know that, obviously him and Mike also have their own meetings that where they discuss the lighting in more detail that I wasn't a part of. But between Michael and I, Michael was really the driving force of how saturated he wanted to make it and which points he wanted to punctuate, especially for his episodes as well. So my role was really to help him explain the light. And build a set and a palette and a backdrop that would accentuate the light when he wanted it and where he wanted it. So one of the most challenging parts was to find practical sources for the light so that we could explain it. Because as much as there's the supernatural of it and there's the, you have like room to explain it away, there is a line earlier on where you still feel like it's realistic until he pushes it past that point. And up until that point, I needed to show like that light comes from this lamp or from this neon or from whatever the source happens to be, the moon. And that was sort of our biggest discussion with lighting. And after that, Michael just did what he does, which is take it all the way.
Well, you both nailed it then. I mean, the lighting does feel like it comes in very naturally, especially the apartment with the cat. It just such a great haunting visual to see. Mm-hmm. Now, who would you say, you talked about earlier about how much you love Tamara Lane's apartment, but who would you say was the most challenging location to sort of envision, both from your interpretation of the scripts and Mike's drive?
It wasn't really a specific one so much as it was the children as a group, because in so many ways they're very similar in that they have an excessive amount of money, an excessive amount of their own specific taste, and they have a lot of personality. But when you have millions and millions of dollars and you all live in the same city, how do you have different looking homes, and what does that mean for each of them? What can I do to show that they're still different and individual characters? So rather than just one being hard, it was more like, okay, so Perry's in an apartment and Camille's in an apartment. What makes those different? What architecture makes it different? Which part of the city do they live in? What furniture are they interested in? And then making sure that everybody had a distinct feel and something that said, like, this is my space and this is how I spent my money. And I think that was the hardest part, was making them feel different.
Now, you mentioned Perry's apartment. I just mentioned it a minute ago. It's one that I feel is probably the most modern of them all in terms of filled with electronics and pop culture stuff. I find it hilarious that Thor's hammer made its way in there. And I'm curious how you went about, decorating the sets in terms of figuring out what could be in there and what couldn't be in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think like decorating is one of my favorite parts of the process. And I think the reason it's a favorite part of mine is because it is a layering process. And it's not just a layering of objects and items and dressing, but it's a layering of other opinions as well, which is to say that, we have Mark Lane, the set decorator, and sometimes we even have actors come in the day before, which I'm open to, and they can give a little insight into their character. And it becomes a process where you are selecting what you think makes sense, but you're learning about the character as you build the space out. And as you think, well, you know what, he would have that there, or he would not have that there. And I love that, because that's where I think you get a lot more depth in terms of the detail that can come in. It's definitely like a really fun process to discover someone and someone's character beyond what you thought you knew, because you just continue to discover them as you build their worlds.
So which actor would you say offered you the most additional insight for their set?
Actually, I would say it was Leo. It was Rahul. He was lovely. We included a lot of details because he's English. We connected beforehand, and he expressed he was a huge Liverpool fan. And so we brought in his football club details into the kitchen. And my partner's actually English, so we borrowed some things from his apartment, knowing that Rahul was open to that he would have those iconic pieces from his childhood, or he wanted to see a photo of Wembley Stadium because he said that's where his character's from, that's his hometown, and he would have that picture in his place. So it was really great to have that kind of fun additional layer in a way that it was all suggestion, right? But that's so valuable. I mean, who knows the characters better at that point, right? They're the ones delving really deep to find what that means for them. And like, why wouldn't you draw on that to help add more?
I love that Rahul did that. I mean, he is clearly such a great collaborator when it comes to Flanagan projects. So that's awesome. Now, I'm also curious to hear how much of the production design and sets were filled with Easter eggs to Poe's works, because this is, obviously there are Raven, imagery throughout, but what other things did you hide throughout these sets?
I love being able to get to the level where we can add those details in for people to look at. And I think there's a lot. There's actually quite a few. And one of my favorite ones is Perry has his party space and he has his bathroom. And I saw this amazing graffiti. I can't remember where I saw it. Just online, but it was a poem scrawled across the wall. And I think it was actually an anti-Trump thing. But anyhow, regardless, I thought, oh, that's so cool. That's so great. The way that it looks so organic and rebellious. And that's so Perry. So in the bathroom, there's a paragraph from The Mask of the Red Death scrawled across the wall in the bathroom graffiti, which is quite large right behind him. And I thought that was kind of a fun hidden little piece. There's other things like in the bar in the 1970s behind Verna, all the stained glass is all based on Edgar Allan Poe stories and imagery. And it's all just very dimly lit amber glass, but we've got the black cat in there and the horse and a bunch of other imagery from his work. There's smaller ones that would be harder to find, like addresses or the house numbers are always years associated with Edgar Allan Poe. Here's the year of his death or the year of his birth, things like that. There's lots of cool little fun ones to find, but those are my favorite.
I'm gonna have to go back and look for those, especially the stained glass. I did not pick up on that before.
Good. See,
such a fun detail.
Yeah.
Now I know this may come more on the makeup or the special effects side than your side, but this is probably Mike's bloodiest show to date, which is pretty crazy to think. And so I'm curious how much collaboration you have with that team to ensure that, it looks right on the set, that it doesn't necessarily mess up the set so much that you cannot, rework it for another scene. What's that collaboration like?
It was a really interesting one. Obviously, Perry's party was a big build for us, a big collaborative build. There's a lot of different departments involved in that particular one, including special effects makeup, but also special effects doing the goo and the blood, paint department doing all the acid and the breakdown of all of the set, and then set deck distressing all the furniture with paint, like collaborating with paint. So a lot of different layers of people in there to do that kind of work. And it's always really fun. I mean, I think as long as everybody is on the same page in terms of the clear vision of what it is, then we can execute it and everybody knows where they're headed. And then it's just a matter of really good communication and kind of constantly working together to get there.
The teamwork has paid off, truly. It looks great across the board. Before I let you go for my final question, the show is about to come out and the reviews are high for it. Have you been seeing any of them? Have you read any of them? And if so, what are your takeaways from seeing that?
Yeah, I've seen some of them. I mean, they're great. I think like they're really bang on. Like I love Mike is an extremely talented, multi-talented man. And I think that when they say the reviews saying it's very bold, it's very daring, and it's very strong, like he really went for it. I love that because that's kind of, he did. And I love that that's being recognized and noticed because it's a bold show. I mean, it's very ballsy. I love that. So I'm glad that it comes across and people are enjoying it because that's what we're here to do, right? We're creating things and expressing ourselves for the enjoyment of everyone. So if they're enjoying it, we did it right.
You definitely did it right. And I agree with you. It's one of Mike's wildest shows to date. And I really can't wait to see what people say about it. So Laurin, thank you so much for taking the time to chat about it. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.